Welcome to the Infrastructure Podcast. My name is Anthony Oliver, and today we're focusing on new towns and specifically the government's ongoing ambitions to tackle the UK's housing crisis through the creation of a new generation of communities across England. Now, Britain's housing crisis is not new, but the scale of the government's ambition to tackle it is. With a target to deliver 1.5 million homes over the next Parliament, the focus is turning to how this can be achieved in a way that creates thriving, sustainable communities rather than disconnected housing estates. And in September, the government accepted the findings of the new Towns Taskforce and committed to working ideas for up to 12 new towns through the work of the new Towns unit, with a consultation planned in the spring. So, some progress, but lots to do. And to discuss the challenge, I'm joined today by Lord Ben Gascoigne, Chair of the House of Lords Built Environment Committee, who will talk us through the findings of the committee's latest report, New Towns Laying the Foundations. This argues that the UK cannot achieve its new town and housing ambitions without decisive national leadership and long-term commitment from central government. It calls for a dedicated cabinet-level minister and a new national delivery agency to oversee a programme of development corporations that are capable of building this new generation of well-planned, infrastructure-led towns. And at the heart of the report lies a message that echoes across decades of British planning history that success demands vision, coordination, and, of course, patience. But in today's fiscal climate and fragmented planning landscape, those qualities are sadly harder than ever to muster. So let's get stuck in. Ben, welcome to the Infrastructure Podcast.
Thank you very much for having me on. It's great to be here.
Well, Ben, let's start with leadership. Your report's central finding is that strong central government leadership is essential. So what's gone missing from government coordination over the past 2 decades that makes this so urgent?
You're right. Well, Anthony, first of all, you're right. I don't need to be on this programme because your summary was so spot on, really. I was listening and nodding along and very well read. This is something that this isn't new. This has been going on for some time, and it's not just about new towns either. And again, you're right. It's also more fundamentally about housing, which we're in desperate need to build a lot more. And the government has set very high ambition, and the New Towns programme is part of that. And just the sort of background is, as you said, they won the election, said New Towns would be a key part of their mission on house building mission going forward, launched the task force to look into possible sites. The task force has given these, as you say, 12 locations across the land. And earlier this year, we decided as a committee, it's a cross-party committee, so it's all parties and on. We thought this is a fascinating subject. It's been tried in the past and worked. It's also been tried in the past and not worked. So we wanted to look at what is possible, what was not. And it's been unbelievably fascinating. And we've all come away from it even more determined to see it through.
Yeah, well, you mentioned the 12 potential sites the task force identified, and of course the New Towns unit, which is going to oversee delivery. I mean, it sounds like progress, isn't it?
I think credit where credit's due. Actually, look, I'm a Conservative, so I'm not going to be here to just sit there and bash in the government. There's plenty of other opportunities to do that. But on this, genuinely credit where credit's due. They came in, they said they wanted to do it. They created the task force. The task force looked at it. Task force a few weeks ago, in September, I think it was, gave these 12 locations. The government responded and said, right, we're going to proceed with the 3. And as you say, it's the 3 that will be consulted on next year.
Yeah.
So that is, credit. But as you said, it is a long-term job. We have to be patient, but you've got to grip it and own it and run with it now. Like, you can't just sort of say the task force looking at it. You can't just say, let's leave it till the concept. We've got to run with it.
Which is where you recommend this cabinet-level minister and a new national delivery agency. So what practical difference will that make on the ground then?
I think, building on what I was just saying, it is also worth paying tribute to the housing minister, Minister Pennicutt. He came to talk to us, and I talk a lot to the Lord's minister, Minister Taylor. Both are very dedicated, so this isn't a criticism about them at all per se. The issue, and I've worked in Downing Street, so I can speak from experience on this, which is, there's a lot of other things happening at any one time. And if you really want to drive this through, you've not only got to talk to local authorities and there's community groups, you've got to engage with and issues to fix on every single location. You've got your cabinet colleagues and crucially the Treasury, Anthony, that you need to get the money.
Well, that's my next point. I mean, you have been around the block in terms of advising Boris Johnson when he was London Mayor, advising Boris Johnson when he was Prime Minister, and Rishi Sunak. So you've been at the top table. You know how government works. How do you persuade Treasury to align behind this kind of single long-term vision rather than short-term housing targets?
Sure. I think, look, they see, as you alluded to at your opening, they do see house building more generally as part of the growth agenda. They put a lot of emphasis on this. So I think part of the battle, they're already there. The question now is what next? How are they going to see it through? And we'll find out in a few weeks in the budget. But I think, you have to have, and this is why we do talk about sort of cabinet level, someone senior enough or something senior enough that's able to fix issues, get other departments as well, transport being a key one, get other departments around the table to step up to the plate, but keep bashing on the door and not sort of hoping that it will come right in the end.
That sounds like breaking down a few silos there, Ben. That sounds a tricky one. Anyway, you also mentioned that, we've been here before in many ways. We've built new towns in the past. I mean, are there lessons that today's government can draw from the leadership perhaps shown in the post-war New Towns programme?
I think there is. We did look at this and we internally we discussed whether we should put a lot of emphasis on what has worked and what hasn't. The issue with doing is it's so exhaustive and it's so subjective to each new town and each attempt. We did set out in our report, which is worth reading, actually, because we did set out some sort of founding principles that have seen success in the past, but because it's a different world in so many ways from the war or even, just look at the last 5 years, never mind 10 years. Things have changed. Things change so rapidly. So we didn't focus too much on the past. We wanted to set out what it is that makes it work in the future.
Yeah. Well, you've mentioned why this is the right moment to produce this report. And of course, the government's placed this 1.5 million homes pledge. Is that, from the work you've done and the conversations you putting together the report, how realistic is that figure without a coordinated national delivery structure?
I think just specifically on the new towns, they talk, I think it is about, if the new towns were built, it's about 300,000. So that is a significant number. And they are only proceeding with these three. But I think, look, the challenge, it isn't, to be fair, unique to this government. It has been a challenge of late, and there are a number of issues behind this. I think, the numbers at the minute, the sort of approvals are not great, to say the least. But I think, let's see how they get on. Yeah. The budget is a key moment for them on this New Towns project. And it is worth making a point. It isn't just about cash up front. It's also just saying that on these sites, the government really wants to drive it through to give the private sector the support and the acknowledgement that they should be involved in it too.
Yeah, well, we'll talk a bit more about the how you think it might be funded. But each town, I think it's going to feature, I don't know, something like 10,000 homes.
Yeah, at a minimum. Yeah.
And I think there's a number of, I think 40% affordable, half for social rent. How do you come up with the right balances for setting, how you set the towns up?
Yeah. Well, if you've also got the background noise. Obviously, London is not a new town, but there's the changes that's been discussed in the last few days on the affordable targets in London. But the task force, when they responded,
reducing the targets.
As well as a few other tweaks. And again, we'll see what happens there. I think it's a step in the right direction, but there's been some different voices of late, but we'll see what happens there. But on the new towns, the task force, when they responded, they did talk about this 40% figure, and the government acknowledged it but didn't set it out clearly. I think there obviously has to be some element of social housing, affordable housing. We didn't delve too much into that, but I think it is something that we will be looking at. We're going to continue to look into this entire issue, but that is one part of the whole funding structure that needs to be looked at.
Yeah, and of course you mentioned the 12 and they're focusing on 3, but they haven't taken the other 9 necessarily off the table. But how do you think these new towns fit into this wider housing delivery? Are they a supplement to or a substitute for urban regeneration or densification of other cities?
I don't think so. And there's some, I won't name names, but I think there was some that I personally thought would have been listed that wasn't listed in terms of regenerating cities in England. I think they all play their part. The task force set out why each one is good and the virtue of each one, which is great. But I think, my view certainly is that there's a lot more to be done. And you're right, there's the 3 that are listed, but I think there's some sort of wording in there which says, there may be issues with those 3, so they may change. They're all subject to change.
Yeah. No, well, there's an awful lot of moving parts, of course, at the moment in government. We've got the planning and infrastructure bill, which is going through.
Tell me about
there's national spatial strategies. Is this the right moment, I suppose, to have this kind of new town programme? Yeah.
Totally, yes, 1,000,000,000%. And actually, I was talking to someone earlier today saying that my own personal view, if you look at, you mentioned the planning bill, when it was discussed, when it was first introduced into the Lords, there's some stuff in the press of late saying the Lords are stalling, the Lords are blocking. 9 times out of 10, everyone said they want, this is an exciting agenda, and certainly for me, it's an exciting agenda. But, this is an opportunity. The government's come in, they said they want to do it. I think broadly, and there's some polling, Public First has done some really good polling to show this, the public are broadly with us in wanting to build houses. Yeah. So I think it is the right time. We have got to do it.
Just not nowhere near where they live. That's always the challenge.
Well, yes, it is. It is worth looking at this, Anthony. For anyone, the polling isn't, but it is true. I've never been a huge fan of this whole there's NIMBYs and there's YIMBYs, because I think a lot of it's too sort of blasé. There's a lot of context you've got to put in. It's a nuanced discussion to be had. But I think if you believe in growth, like I do, and not everyone does, I've heard people say they don't like the idea of growth for whatever reason, that actually, if you do believe in growth, people have got to feel the benefits. It can't just be, people have legitimate concerns about pressure on their public services, whatever it may be, local social infrastructure, for example. These are legitimate concerns. And I think it's a job of government and local government to make sure that people do see the benefits.
Yeah. But about you, Ben,
yes.
You've been in the House of Lords since 2022, and let's say before that, you've spent a career in political, as political advisor, Boris Johnson, Mayor as Prime Minister. What's about your professional and political background has shaped your thinking about housing planning and placemaking?
So when I worked with Boris when he was Mayor of London, I worked with a very good friend of mine. So he's a very close friend of mine, Ed Lister, who was Boris's deputy mayor for planning. He also ran Wandsworth, and the Mayor of London, and I'd say other cities are catching up, but they have such power. It isn't just a sort of ceremonial role. They have such power. And on the back of the crash, both Boris and Ed Lister saw the necessity to really go for growth. And I think I sat in endless meetings, and you really saw the opportunities. And you look at, one of the examples I was talking about recently in the House of Lords was Vauxhall Nine Elms. I know it's controversial at the time, but to get that scale, you've got to sort of, this is where I'm really passionate about the leadership role. You've got to really get in, throw a lot of time into it, and sit down with developers and make things work.
Because it relies on the infrastructure as well.
Totally.
You're chairing the Built Environment Committee in the House of Lords. How's the House of Lords and its activities, how does it influence government policy?
So there's a sort of formal process. So, using our report at the minute, we obviously we hold the government to account. We will question them. We've issued this report. They will respond. We'll then have a full debate in Parliament. But there's also sort of on the fringes, there's debate. I've had fantastic engagement. This is where I do pay tribute to, particularly the Lords Minister. She's been fantastic to me personally. I will talk to her about this and any planning issue, to be honest. So, there is this sort of, it's, I think unlike the Commons in the Lords, it's a lot more, it's certainly a lot more friendly, but it's a lot more collegiate. Collectively, we all try and work together as much as we can.
So, what does a person who used to advise senior Tory politicians get up to nowadays under a Labour administration?
Well, on this, I must, on the planning bill, for example, I do find it interesting. I find it exciting. I actually want the planning bill to be a lot better, a lot more ambitious. I personally, and it's not because I'm criticising the government. I actually think it's lacking some ambition. I want them to really go for it. That's democracy. It's the joys of democracy. And I think, through the committee, I've got, like I say, all parties and none. I work very well with the Labour peers on there as well as other parties. I enjoy it. And like I say, the Lords is very different, thankfully, to the Commons. It's much more friendly.
You're speaking to me from Surrey, but clearly from your voice, that's not where you grew up. Where are you originally from?
East Lancashire, originally. A tiny town called Nelson, near Burnley.
Right. Do you go back up?
Not as much as I should. My family, if my family are listening, they'll be nodding in agreement. Not as much as I should, but it's I'm very fond of it up there. It's as you say, I'm down in Surrey with my family.
The reason I ask that is because you must see a difference in the kind of the need when you're looking at housing and communities when you travel from the north to the south, because obviously the infrastructure is so much better in the south. And it therefore leads to, or does it, to lead to better community cohesion?
Yes, I was literally about to say that again. You've stolen my thunder again. No, totally. And I think also there's something about the wider economy. You know, there's a lot more private sector jobs down here, which there isn't sadly up there. So I think that there is something, and that it isn't just about community cohesion. I think it's also, the sort of sense of belonging. I think, I would like to see, one of the things I get, he's controversial to me, but one of the things I really liked working with Boris on was the whole levelling up agenda.
Yeah.
Because I do think, it wasn't just a sort of north-south thing, though obviously it's looked through in that prism. But, I'm not saying we got anywhere near as much as we should have done. We didn't. But, there is something more there.
Yeah, it became something of a dirty word, didn't it? That's the thing about whole kind of strategy.
Yeah, I think so. And I think he was sort of, I used to, between us, I used to slightly tear my hair out sometimes when there'd be these grand sort of visions and debates, and and fundamentally a lot of it, I always felt that actually, if a bit like one of the rare times I'd praise him probably, but Hezza, look at what he did with Liverpool. He got business up there, and I think a lot of the problems that I feel can be tackled with making sure there's a lot of private sector jobs.
Yeah, well, of course, Michael Heseltine, he also got the Docklands Development Corporation, got that whole area going. And of course, the committee is cross-party. Yes. All of these successful developments, they have to be cross-party.
Totally.
I mean, is that harder, building that consensus in an environment where today's politics are so binary, they are so black and white?
Certainly, I think... yes, you're right, fundamentally. But equally, in the Lords, I think there is no one party that has a majority. There's larger parties than others. But certainly within the Tory party, there's lots of divisions within us. So, it's not one, one single happy family. But I think politics still, I'm a great believer that actually, it is not only right, but it's good to work with as many people as possible. You're not going to win everyone over. You're not going to win every single argument. But, and if you look at the whole New Towns programme, one of the things we're really keen on is, because it is fundamentally a long-term project, you need to build as much sort of community and cross-party consensus as you can.
Yeah. Well, before I move on to the report, one final, I hear that you've got a bit of a podcast plan yourself. What's that all about? Is that about housing, or is that something completely different?
Well, I'm a great believer. I'm a great believer in podcasts. I think that podcasts are a great way, a great medium in which to connect to people. And as I was saying to you beforehand, quite often when I wake up at ridiculous hours in the morning, sometimes with my children, my young children, I do doze off to many podcasts. So I think I do think there's a great virtue in people listening and hearing different views. You don't have to agree with them all, but it's good to get views out there.
Good. And how many kids have you got?
I've got two.
Oh, right.
Two. One and a 5-year-old.
All right, so you haven't got much time at all then.
No, I haven't. But do you know what is amazing? In fact, I just said goodbye to it's half to what is amazing, and this it is read through to the Lords, but also the committee is. Often when we talk about new towns or we talk about our lives, we see it rightly, and it's just human. You see it through your own prism. So you see it, when we talk about the need to put in parks and things like that, I see it through my kids' ages. But obviously they will grow old, and as we once were teenagers. That's a different sort of park you're talking about. And when you're older, I've got a mum that has sadly Alzheimer's. The reality is the sort of structure around her. So what we're trying to do with it, and that's why we're much more sort of broader in our report, which is setting out sort of something that will last through all walks of life from beginning to end, really.
Yeah, well, the reality is that quite a lot of these new towns, they will probably be built just about time for your kids to move in. So,
they probably will. I'll be well gone by then.
Well, let's get back to the report. It argues that infrastructure, transport, schools, hospitals, must come before housing. How do you make that financially and politically viable?
Yeah, so we looked at some examples where it hasn't worked recently, and there are sadly some examples, but that is just life. But we've got to learn from that, which is when there have been efforts, they've been planned, very well planned, and it's been part of the master plan to have infrastructure in its wider sense put in. And by that, I mean, it's not just roads and trains and all that. It is also social infrastructure. It's health facilities, schools, as well as shops. Even when they planned, they don't always come to fruition. And one in particular, for years, it didn't have shops or a GP, a new town. That has created a lot of concern locally.
Yeah.
So it is important you put it, you don't only plan for it, but you put it in first. And often this again comes to a point of you need the government to be either financially backing it or making clear that they're underwriting it.
Yeah. I mean, it's a global issue. I was in Canada a couple of weeks ago talking about just this thing. The Canadian Infrastructure Council was doing a report on infrastructure-led housing. You have to have those things in place. The government there is talking about you need to put in place the infrastructure before you start thinking about the...
Yes, totally.
Other examples where delivering infrastructure first has transformed outcomes for the community.
Yes, totally. And there are some in this country, but we visited, we went to Copenhagen and we saw, and their level of ambition, I mean, they knocked the socks off us. They're really driving their own new towns agenda. I think they're on about their third one, but one of the earlier ones, which I think from memory they started in the 80s, they on an empty plot of land, basically, they put in just a metro line, a tube line, in the middle of nowhere. There was literally, I couldn't tell you what it was like then, but in the middle of nowhere. And then all of a sudden, it demonstrated confidence in that site, and it opened up. And I think the national TV went in, and then all of a sudden it sort of created a life of its own, and off it went.
Yeah.
So yes, there are examples, and again, it doesn't need to be the state. It can be the state sort of underwriting and displaying confidence to investors.
Yeah. Well, the reality is the task force recommended, for example, new settlements in Tempsford, central Bedfordshire, which is to maximise the benefits of East West Rail, and it also talks about a renewed town in Milton Keynes supported by a mass rapid transit system. So the ideas are there. How do we overcome the current siloed development mentality then? Because the reality is it's hard to get that kind of thinking going on. It
is hard. And we talk also about having development corporations involved as a sort of delivery body to do it. But, sorry to be boring and repeating my points, which is if you have someone or something which is able to say, right, Treasury, this is what we need, whatever the vision is, whatever, and it is worth bearing in mind that of the 12 sites that's been mentioned, they're not all new towns. A lot of these are expanded settlements. Most of them are expanded settlements. They're not new towns in themselves, but you still need something at the top that's able to say, right, we've got a problem here. Anthony, step in, fix this, do this. But it will take, it takes time, as you said earlier, but it does require a lot of grip.
Yeah. Are there mechanisms, for instance, to ensure land value uplift from new infrastructure directly supports the cost of delivery? I know you tried it in London.
Yeah.
There were some areas around
the Vauxhall 9 arms that I took. Yes, we took. There's sort of Levitt again working with business, looking at that. But also, there's again, it depends upon the sites, because obviously, if there's surrounding infrastructure already or whatever it may be, there may not be as much land value to capture, but there could be other, there's lots of things, and we should be exploring it where we can.
Yeah. Talking about funding, the report calls for patient investment. I think echoing maybe Treasury's long-term loans for post-war new towns, perhaps. I don't know. I mean, how do you describe that? I mean, how can such patient capital be mobilised?
Well, I think, again, it's just looking at different ways in which you can explore utilising and raising different finance. And I think, again, a lot depends upon what's pre-existing, the sort of governance structures that's already in existence. But I think, from our perspective, we don't sort of say you should do this or should do that. We just say that you should consider these options.
Yeah. Do you see a role for institutional investments and pension funds, in funding the next generation of new towns?
Totally. Yes, there's certainly an option. I mean, my own personal view, and again, we didn't go into a great detail on specific financing, but, these sorts of funds, they need to be brought in very early on if they are going to be part of the conversation. Yeah. But yeah, we should be utilising it because, going back into the past, I'm not saying post-war our finances are in any better state, but, we're in, there are a lot of challenges at the minute. So, we should be looking at raising finance elsewhere.
Yeah. You also suggest government should retain a small ownership stake in each development corporation. Why is that important for accountability and for confidence in the market then?
Well, for precisely those two reasons, really. I mean, again, going back to the Copenhagen experience we saw, where the state had, and it's in our report, we talk a bit about it. The state had a 5% stake in one of the, in effect, the development corporation, and the local government retained the rest. And for that, again, ultimately, in some scenarios, that just demonstrates that the state is the underwriter, is there and still has an interest in seeing it succeed.
Yeah.
It demonstrates a level of support and real continued support.
Lots of great opportunities, lots of great ambition. But, and there's always a but, Ben. I mean, how do you see new towns winning public trust? Because ultimately you've got to get not only the political support behind it, you've got to get community support behind these.
Yeah, totally.
How do you get the public trust when so many people associate large-scale development with disruption, loss, and poor design, frankly?
Yeah, well, I think design is part of it, and obviously, in the areas where it's an expanded settlement, you've got to take into consideration some of the town, the infrastructure or whatever it may be that's nearby. But yeah, we do talk about having design codes that reflect local needs and desires. We also talk about having the community involved from the very beginning, but throughout the entire process. I got to an earlier point. You're never going to win everyone over. But what was interesting is there was some polling which was sent to us, which roughly it sort of said a third of the people don't support new towns, a third of the people support new towns, and a third of the people, sort of TBC. And I think, with that, you should be taking people on that journey. And, you will get opposition, but that's why I think it is important that you engage and demonstrate the overall benefits to the programme.
Yeah, and you also talk about nationally and locally sensitive design standards, and of course, creating homes that people can live in.
Yes,
and communities that can thrive is that's vital. I mean, how do you ensure that quality by design isn't the first casualty of cost pressures and speed?
Yeah, well, I think it's a very fair point, and you're right. So there are some examples, and I think we were talking earlier about, you were talking about architecture in one of your previous podcasts. It does matter because it also shows that people, it will allow people to feel much more at home in that area. So I think we have to build in those sorts of design codes from the very beginning and make sure that it is part of the overall master plan.
So we've got the master plan, we've got the will, we've got the financing, but of course, finally, I suppose, delivery, skill shortage, and planning are a recurring theme. What's your prescription then, Ben, for building the professional capacity to deliver at scale? Because that's what's required, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. And there is read through more broadly to development as a whole. It's not just an issue specific to new towns, and nor is it something that sort of cropped up overnight. This is a sort of long-term issue. We do talk about that. We talk about, and it's not just on the planning front. It's also the sort of bricklaying and other parts. What we explore is, we pay tribute, I think, from memory to the government for the funding that they've put in recently around the planners, the shortage of planners. But what we want to explore is where there is larger developments, that there should be some sort of engagement between, to constantly use and utilize and learn best practice, but keep this sort of skill set in use, in effect. Because the problem is you can't turn it on and off, as you know. You've got to keep it. It will take time.
It's got to be part of a pipeline of activity that goes on. So what happens next with the House of Lords committee in this report? This report comes out. What is your role from now on? Do you get involved with the consultation? What happens now with the committee?
So we will. It is worth saying when we embarked on this journey, we were interested in the subject. We wanted to see it succeed broadly. As we've concluded it, we're now really passionate. We really, really care about it, and we want to work with the government to support them in driving it through. We're going to move on to the next bit. It's a sort of long inquiry, is this, Anthony? You'll be pleased to know. So I'll be back again in a few months. Where the next bit that we were about to talk about is, in effect, it's placemaking and architecture to some extent. For me, I call it, what is a community? How do you make it successful? And you're going back to my other point, your vision of what a community is very different to what mine is. Yeah. But whatever it is, and using again some examples of where it's gone wrong, whatever sort of plan for how do you deliver it, how do you make it work, and financially make it possible.
Yeah. Well, finally, government's promised the public consultation on the proposals in the spring. Is this new era of new towns, is it possible in the UK? Will we actually see it happening?
Well, I don't have the Secretary of State's red cap to say "build, baby, build," but that's it. That's the government's mantra, and I hope we do it. I genuinely hope we do it. And I think the crucial thing is we do it, but we do it. This has to be a national endeavour, and we do talk about that. We have to. I'm not saying everyone's going to be hugely excited by this, but it should be part of our dialogue, and we should sort of really feel that it is something we're working towards. Not just for those that will directly benefit, but more widely. So I hope we do. I think this is. I think this is an exciting thing.
Well, with Mission for Growth, I imagine will still be at the top of the agenda when it comes to the budget. Is there stuff in the budget that needs to be there for you?
For us, yes. I think on this, absolutely there should be, and possibly something around the skills side. But I think more generally, just demonstrating some sort of support for the whole program. And like I've said before, it doesn't need to be necessarily. I mean, yes, there is cash ideally, but given that this is a sort of the initial dialogue consultation, it'd be good to see the government say we are going to do X, Y, and Z. And it'd be good, to your earlier point. You're right. It's only 3. What's happening with the others?
Well, we shall see.
We shall see.
Lord Gascoigne, Ben, thank you so much for joining me on the Infrastructure Podcast today. Really interesting challenges ahead. Really interesting challenges facing society and, of course, the whole of the infrastructure sector. So I'm sure everyone will have a good look at the report and see how we can get on. So thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you very much. It's been great.
Great stuff. Well, that's all we've got time for, sadly, on the podcast today, but we have got more in the pipeline and more guests to talk to as we continue to probe the big issues faced across the sector. If you haven't done so already, do check out the Infrastructure Podcast website, www.infrastructure-podcast.com, where you'll find background information and all the latest podcasts to listen to and share. I'll put a link to the House of Lords report in there. So thanks for joining us. Thanks again to Ben, and I look forward to seeing you again very soon.